So let's talk about the writing process. I think there's probably 2 slides worth of process notes I have here, so we'll kind of march through them. Um, the first step in the writing process is identify what you're doing, right? Like identify and refine the core outcome that you want to communicate. And what I mean here is focus on the thing that you're achieving, not the task that you're undertaking. So like a distinction would be, um, instead of saying I'm developing a power cycle model, I'm developing a solar field model, we have this project that I'm trying to just help out on, right? That's sort of a task related thing. You got to move past that point to really understand what the objective or what the core outcome is. So it'd be something like, for example, these are just three that kind of occurred to me. We've developed a way to predict the optical performance of a solar field that uses a new heliostat, and we have a method to optimize the layout. We have some results that illustrate performance for a case that we care about, right? That is kind of a core outcome of the research. So Sammy, this was using you as an example. B would be using Jacob for these two. So we have a really flexible microgrid testbed that allows us to do power hybrid in the loop experiments for hybrid systems that include some modeled aspect of CSP, right? That after some time we've decided that's the outcome that I'm trying to get to, or that I've gotten to. A different outcome from that would be my microgrid testbed measurements are showing that the steam drum level is really important for overall system control. So you find this like little kernel of something that's really interesting, that is different, that is new, that either is something you've achieved or something you want to achieve. And then once you've identified that new piece or new pieces, from there, the entire structure basically backs out of it. So you'd move from this core task or core achievement to like a working title that goes with that. So these three example titles might go with those three achievements. Like A would be optical characterization and layout optimization of a novel 2-stage heliostat concept. You could imagine that being a journal paper. A PHIL testbed for hybrid power generation system research, or the impact of steam drum level control and Rankine cycle dynamic stability. So once you have this, you start to see the paper taking shape, right? And the shape that it's taking has a lot to do with what the nature of the research that you've described in like that in point 1 is. So I mean, if you look at, say, example B versus example C. So example B is going to be focused on methodology, right? We're going through and we're describing a way in which somebody else, if they wanted to come along, could produce a facility that lets them experimentally model this type of a system. So it's a methodology focused paper. It's a capability focused paper, whereas outcome C is a very specific learned or research outcome. Like we exercised the model and we found this specific thing that's a new a new thing that we can use to design systems or operate systems in a better way. So there you're focused more on the results as opposed to the methodology. You're focused on understanding how that result might live in the space and how it might affect other things that people are doing in the space. So like the early statement of the objective and the outcomes helps you understand whether your paper is more methodology, like capability, or results oriented. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so now you've got a core idea, you've got a title to go with it. And then the next thing would be write an abstract. A lot of people will say, like, wait to write the abstract until the very end. I think writing the abstract is your first attempt at like a coherent in words explanation of what you're doing. So this first attempt at an abstract is certainly not going to be the final thing that shows up in the paper. It's your first attempt at saying what all is involved in this paper. And so that should include, a number of things, not just like an introduction. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So you have your abstract. The next step would be then a rough outline. So like if you were to sit down in, say, a weekend and try to start writing a paper, I would expect to be able to go from step 1 to step 4 in like 1 or 2 sittings, right? You sit down, you get to this point. At this point, you've got a rough outline. The rough outline is going to include the sections of the paper, specific points that you want to make in each section. It's not going to include a lot of text. It's not going to include a lot of discussion or literature review or anything like that. It's just kind of sketching out where everything's going to go, and really importantly, making the main points, like stating in sentences what the main points are for each section that you're trying to make. So like, I guess the way to think about this is you're picking something that you want the reader to know. And you have to then think of all the things that you have to communicate to, one, help the reader understand what you're talking about. 2, to give them the necessary understanding of your methodology to help them believe that what you've done is valid. And then 3, to like show the results and kind of give them a sense of both the raw data and then how you interpret it. So you're really starting with a clear objective in mind and then backing everything out of that. So again, you get to the rough outline, and then you can go say, okay, now I kind of know where I need to start on my research and what this is going to look like. So then there might be a gap in time between this point, with this rough outline, and where you then pick up later to start filling things in. So any questions on this part so far?
Matt put a question in the chat.
Okay, Matt has a question in the chat. Matt says, do methodology papers tend to get cited more? It depends, I guess. What I would say is the papers that get cited the most are papers that actually don't make a novel contribution. I mean, papers that are like review papers. So people are lazy, as it turns out, and like to cite review papers because it prevents them from having to do all that review themselves. So if you're doing like a paper in CSP, and instead of having to describe CSP, you just cite a paper that's a review of CSP technologies, that paper is going to get cited hundreds of times because there's lots of people doing that. So review papers, they're really tedious, and they're tedious to write. They have the value is that they're consolidating everything in one place, but they end up getting cited a lot. Methodology papers, yeah, if you are the one who developed, what's an example here? You develop a methodology, so like say Mark Anderson, he's developed methodologies for like optical testing or testing of temperature using optical properties of a fiber. So that's like a methodology, right? And that's going to get a lot of attention because it's a new way of getting information that maybe a lot of people are going to use. But then you look at like specific results, and if the result is very impactful or changes the way people understand the field, that gets cited. So I think there's different ways that each of these different things could be impactful, and it's not necessarily true that one is better than the other or more impactful. The next thing is going to be the detailed outline. So as you're doing research, you develop a new valve model, or you are taking data on your battery testing, and you have some interesting result, but it's not complete. At that point, I would say that's a good time to go back and just start adding little paragraphs here and there, keeping this paper as if it's like your research, like your research companion in a way. It's going with you the whole way. So you go back and you write something so that when it comes time to remember it, 6 months down the road, you have a pretty clear description there. You don't want to necessarily treat this like it's your lab notebook, but you want things to be kind of in a state where you're pretty sure. But at any point where you've made a step forward to the next thing, that's a really good time to go back and update, adding in little descriptions and little sentences here and there that help give a sort of fill it out. This can come in chunks and happen as you have time to do it. At this stage, you're still writing with the expectation that the content will be removed entirely or changed. So don't spend a lot of time writing out pages of clean, well thought out text, because that's likely to be a waste of time. At some point, you're going to go back and want to change that. So here, you're still thinking about this in terms of an outline. Core ideas are in complete sentences, but really not much more than that. You can start, if you have graphics or things that are being developed along the way, you can start dumping those in, and that'll help you see how it's going to take shape. But that's sort of what I would recommend there. Use placeholders and notes liberally. And by placeholders, I mean you say, okay, my result that I intend to get is this. I need to, in order to get from step 2 to step 5, I need to fill in steps 3 and 4. So you may not have done that yet, but you can put in a placeholder that says, okay, step 3, do this, step 4, do that, and maybe write what you're expecting to see. Because if you expect to see something and you see something different, that's interesting. And that's maybe a way that your research is going to be shaped from that. So the placeholders can be like, helpful ideas of where to go next in your research. At this point, you probably want to start establishing the core or like the key citations, the references that you're relying on, that you're building from, that you're comparing against. Just keep them all in one place and kind of have them ready to go for when you are writing. Step 6 would be, at this point, you now have like a pretty detailed outline. You have a lot of the research done. Now you can start writing up the more exhaustive discussion of the related work. And again, this is now before you're done with your final results, but you're at a point where you need to make sure that what you're doing is not totally duplicating somebody else. This is a really good time to go back, refresh your lit review, check if there's anything else going on that's been updated since you started, and then maybe write out like little 1-sentence descriptions of each paper in a few paragraphs, and that becomes your lit review. Okay, so now you're at the point you've done a lot of research. You can start writing up the results. Write up the methodology that you use to get to the results, and then step 9, go back to step 6, and keep doing this until you have you write up something, you learn that you've missed an aspect, so you have to go back, update your methodology, get new results, write it up again. Does that make sense? So you just kind of keep going in a circle until everybody involved is pretty comfortable that you're confident in the results, you're confident in the methodology, you don't feel like you've missed anything. And then at that point, you kind of move on to the last part, which is writing up the background that any reader is going to need, the discussion of the results, and then conclusions. Okay. So that's like the outline of the writing process. I know it sounds like a lot, and it's really not that bad, right? You don't want to wait to do everything at the last minute. You also don't want to do a huge amount of work up front and then have wasted your time. So the art here is like finding the balance between that initial investment for organizational purposes and having a lot of material.